Hello, and welcome to No Wrong Choices, the podcast that explores the career journeys of interesting and accomplished people to uncover insights that we can use within our own journeys. I'm Larry Samuel, soon to be joined by Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. If you enjoy the stories that we're bringing forward, please support us by liking and following our show on your favorite podcasting platform, following us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, and by becoming a subscriber to the show by signing up at NoWrongChoices.com. This episode is part 2 of our conversation with music talent manager and producer Scott Barkham. In part 1, Scott talked about how he learned the ropes of the music business while managing the Riversound recording studio for Steely Dan's Donald Fagen and producer Gary Katz. Now we explore how he leveraged everything he learned to become an established music talent manager and producer. We picked things up with Tushar asking Scott how he pivoted after Riversound closed its doors.
So what was next, Scott, after that? What was next?
Well, Gary started this record label called Jake Records, and it's not a great. That's not a great chapter. It was like a year and a half, almost 2 years of my life. I would say like 97 to 99. Like I worked with him and a couple of his partners at this label. We released 2 albums. One of them was a digital underground album, hip hop. And it was the golden era of hip hop. The album was good. Wasn't like, it was good. And we
put
out
the Humpty Dance album, was it?
No, it was not the Humpty Dance album. It was an album called Who Got the Gravy. And there was like one other album that was a compilation that got released, but it was a tough scenario, and it didn't last long. Like the money, the company had basically been given a joint venture deal by Jimmy Iovine when he was running Interscope. And once that money ran out, that was another one that was really hard to sustain. And I remember when that was over. And then I'm like, what the hell am I going to do now? And so I put myself out there for A&R jobs because that's what I wanted. That's kind of what I wanted all along. And I started going for those, and it was challenging. And then one of my dearest friends who worked in television was like, look, Scott, I got this production I'm doing for Sundance Channel. We need a production coordinator. I'm trying to get someone experienced to do it, but if I can't find someone, would you do it?
How old are you at this point, Scott?
28, 29.
Okay.
So much has happened.
Yeah.
Maybe 30.
I mean, it sounds like you had like a lifetime of work experience. And just going through the hard times and like the gravy times, like packed within like a 5 or 6 year period.
It was fast and furious. So yeah, like I basically wound up getting hired to do this show, and I actually had the skill set to do it because it wasn't that different from managing a studio. Working in production management for a television production. But I also got to know people when I was there, and the guy that was directing it did all the storytellers things for VH1. And he pretty quickly sized me up as a music person and was like, you need to work at VH1. Here's a couple of people to call. One of them was a girl that I had dated a few times. And so I went over there and I met with all of them and with my resume, and they started calling me for work. And like, God bless my friend Alex McDowell. Like she's like, I have an empty desk. She had me PA on something for her, Storytellers with Stone Temple Pilots. And then she was like, look, my production coordinator just like flew the coop. Will you just sit at the desk for a month? I'll pay you like, whatever it was. It was enough. It was better than unemployment.
Right.
And like, just get your resume around the building. And I did. And I connected with some people in the development department who saw that I was a music guy. And then they started calling me if they had a show that needed bands, and they would call me. So I did a pilot for unsigned bands that Joe Rogan hosted.
Wow.
It was called like
a great show, by the way. My God, yeah.
That was just like a pilot. I think it aired one time. And then a guy pitched later that year a game show of like for cover bands to play any song on the spot in any style. And they tasked me with finding 30 bands that could do it to compete on the show.
Wow.
First, we did the pilot. I had to find 3 that could do it. And then they were like, we're going to go to series. Can you find 27 more?
Oh my God.
Oh man.
And I did. Like, we came up with a list of songs for people to play. And I had a PA who would be, filming it, and I'm directing them and I'm telling them what to do. And it was such a surreal experience. And actually, like, probably the single most fun gig that I had working in television. And it was just very satisfying. Paul Schaefer hosted the show.
Oh, wow. How
Like,
did you find the bands?
I put ads out in like the Village Voice and like other local papers. I like scoured the internet, which was still in its sort of early phases, but like you could find cover bands. And I discovered some people that booked a bunch of cover bands, especially for whatever reason in the Philly area. Found a ton of bands there. So I was driving down to Philly 2-3 times a week and auditioning these bands. Some of them could really play. Some of them I was so impressed with how musical they were that I was like, do you have anything original? And then they'd play me something, and I'd just be like, okay, I get why you're doing it. But like some of these bands really had terrific musicians, and like I know one of them has gone on to become very successful, one of the musicians. But it was fun. It was a really good time. I enjoyed working at VH1 a lot. And while I was there, I got recruited to work at Fuse, which was then called Much Music USA, which Much Music was like the Canadian MTV. And the Dolan family that like owns Madison Square Garden and the Knicks, they owned Cablevision, and they had a bunch of cable networks at the time, and that was one of them. So I got a staff job. It was like the first staff job, with the only job I've ever had with a 401k. It's the only job I ever had with really good medical benefits, and that was a long time ago. So I'm just a sole practitioner now, but like I was a talent producer at Fuse for many years, like 5 years, but mainly like doing casting and overseeing their on-air talent. So it wasn't even bands, but I maintained a connection to record labels because I was doing all their sort of online promotions, and it kind of kept me connected with people at different labels, which was really helpful. And everybody knew me as a music guy. Now Fuse, like I had a couple really good years and a couple really bad years because it was a little bit like junior high school and very cliquey, and like the people that ran the network were like getting fired and new people were coming in. And if you weren't one of the people that was like their people, they just treated you like you were inherited and they didn't care about you. And so people really clicked up, and I hated that. And I really like did not enjoy any aspect of that at all. But there were some great people that I worked with at Fuse. And like one of the moments, like my supervisor was like, Scott, all the interns want to interview you because they want to know about your experience in the music business. I'm like, how do they know about it? Because I really didn't talk about it. But like I guess somebody had said, Scott worked for Steely Dan, and I went through the whole thing of my career, and also as a musician, which I was still doing at that time. And somebody asked me, like, Scott, if you could leave television and just work in music, would you do it? And I was like, yeah, yes, I would. And I knew I had to leave, but I waited for them to lay me off, and I knew that was going to happen because I wanted severance, and I got it. And then during that time, I started to like pick up management clients and really pursued. But by then the music business was fucked. Like there were no jobs. Like the record labels couldn't make money. Nobody can make money.
What year is this again, Scott? What year?
07, 06, 07. So that's when I started, man. Like I worked at Fuse from 01 to 06, and then started managing. And it was just like steadily. Like I think the one through line for me is like I don't really take no for an answer when it pertains to me, even if it's a hard path, even if there's a lot of struggle. I tend to like make my opportunities, even if I'm not like I'm not a music mogul. I'm not the most successful manager that you're ever going to meet. I'm just doing it. I'm doing what I'm doing. But
you're grinding
like
out.
but I've never, if I can't get a job anywhere, then I'll make my own job. It's just the way that I am.
So what does becoming a manager look like? How do you pursue that? How do you put that together? What is that?
You find artists you like, and you reach out to them and you talk to them about their music and about what they're doing and about what their dreams and aspirations are. And they start to, they get that you know what you're talking about, that you speak the same languages that they speak. And if they start to trust you and like you, you have an opportunity to work with them and help them mold their careers, and that's really what I've wanted to do. It's like, I just want to talk music with people and help them have a sustainable career in this business. You just kind of, like, there was a band from the unsigned bands thing that I did for VH1. A publisher sent me a cassette and I was like, these guys are amazing. They actually had a very Steely Danish sort of quality to their music, but like, great singer, really well played, incredibly well written songs. And there were just 4 of them. And like, I remember hitting the publisher and saying, like, I don't think we can put them on this show, but I love them. Can you put me in touch? And I got to know them. And like a few months in, the drummer calls me and he's like, Scott, have you heard of the Neptunes? And I was like, no, who are they? Because my head was under a rock. I didn't know who they were. And he was like, well, this guy, Pharrell Williams, like, wants to work with us.
Wow.
And I think we're going to, be his backing band. And then I checked out who they were, and I was like, oh, You Don't Have to Call by Usher is the Neptunes. Yeah. Oh, like, just like a bunch of Jay-Z stuff that I knew that I really liked, that was really musical. There was like a whole series of songs that I'm like, oh, I actually really like this song. So I didn't know who they were, but I liked them. So it was a sense of like, I have taste. I might hear something and think it's really good. And then occasionally, so does somebody like Pharrell Williams. So how do I get myself into the situation where I'm that person in the middle of that? But I had the confidence that I'm very picky when it comes to food, and I'm very picky when it comes to music. I don't like everything that I hear. I don't like everything that I eat. But if I tell you to go get pizza at a particular place in New York, trust me that it's going to be really good. And I think, like, I don't like a lot of music that's awesome music. It's just not for me. But if I hear something and I really love it, there's a good chance that other people will love it too. And I'm not saying that to be arrogant. It's just like, that's one of my skills when it comes to music, is I can hear something and know that something's there, at least for me, and have the confidence to think that it will be there for other people too. Maybe not the masses, but enough other people to help this artist have a career. Now, I had no part of this band Spy Mob's trajectory to being NERD's backing band. And like, they were also, at the end of the day, like, they released an album on the Neptunes label Star Trek, and unfortunately it wasn't successful. And that was that. But it was, but they got that. You get your shot. Sometimes that's all you get is your shot.
Yeah.
And like, do you give up at that point, or do you try to find another way forward? And those guys have all gone on to have successful careers, and I think the guitar player in that band still plays with Pharrell. But like, my point is, like, I knew I had ears. I knew I found an acid jazz band and a whole scene in New York, and that got 2 bands signed to Warner Brothers when I was like 24 years old. I knew I trusted my taste. I still do. I trust my taste.
So that's lending to your courageousness to venture out on your own. You knew you could do it. You had the confidence you could do it. Before we go a little further, though, so ultimately, as a band manager, your job is to just help them flourish in their career. You want them to succeed at any level. What are the roles and responsibilities there? What are you responsible for in terms of being a band manager when you're now looking for talent, because you're about to find a big talent? So what are you doing there to forward momentum their careers?
I mean, there's no like,
no manual.
There's no manual. There's no guidebook for how to, starter guide for how to do it.
Yeah.
For me, it's like, I hear something, I love it, I see a bunch of paths forward. That usually makes me want to get involved. I have to really like the artist too, like, personally. So like, my management, I found a band from London, it's like power trio. It was rock, but it had a little bit of funk to it. And they got stolen away from me by another person in the UK, and it broke my heart, but I learned a valuable lesson. And then at the end of the day, those band members became dear friends of mine. So like, I'm not a bridge burner. You know, it was an unpleasant experience that taught me a lot early in my management time, but I stuck with it. And then I like have been playing keyboards with a couple really good friends of mine in a like low key project. And one time we were rehearsing and we went to see a band play at a little bar on Metropolitan Avenue in Williamsburg. This is before Williamsburg was super hot, but it was definitely like becoming a bit of a music scene. They were called the Pimps of Joy Time. Awesome band. And it was like a jammy funk band. And the singer sounded like Prince to me. And they just played great. And I approached them and like I think the singer like took my number and called me back and was like, "Hey, you want to have coffee?" And I said, "Hey, how do you feel about being on the jam band circuit? Would you be interested?" And they're like, "No, that's not what we do." And then like 2 weeks later, he called me again and he said, "So what does that mean?" You know, I was like, "You know what? Actually, I think I'm interested in maybe trying to pursue that." And I had a business partner at that point. I think you were going to ask me about it. Like my friend Guy Eckstein, who was like similar position to me. We were just like, we had been in the music business. Like both of us were trying to figure out our next move in the business. And somehow we connected. I don't remember how, and became friends and started talking about stuff and formed a management company together. And the band that I found was the Pimps of Joy Time. He found another artist, and like, we're doing our thing. And like, between a guy had a friend who knew jam band booking agents, which we needed to find. And one of them was familiar with this band. And he came to see them play in New York and sign them. And that guy, sadly, he died a few years ago. His name was Jesse Arito. But he really mentored me in terms of like how to put a band on the road, which I had never done before. Right. So again, you know, this is like, we're just having some organizational skills and just being able to like get your hands dirty with whatever comes in front of you is helpful because, you know, I just was like, okay, I'll tour manage this. They don't have a lot of money. Like basically the singer was able to scrounge up money to buy a van and leave it in California where they had their biggest sort of fan base. And we started touring and we spent a year just going all around the US, like all up and down the West Coast, West and East and all over the place. Like I saw a lot of America with that band, places that I've, you know, never really thought I would have visited. Like I've been to 49 out of the 50 states at this point.
Wow.
All because of this band.
Right.
So, you know, and I was only with them for about a
what's
year.
What's the 50th?
Well, what state is missing?
Take a guess. You all get one guess.
Hawaii.
No, it's not
Alaska.
It's not Hawaii and it's not Alaska. So take a guess.
Nebraska.
No. Been there a bunch of times.
North Dakota.
Wyoming.
Yes. Yes.
North
Dakota.
Nothing against North Dakota.
Yeah, I've been to South Dakota, but not North Dakota. And then the next time I'm like in Minneapolis for enough time to like rent a car and drive to Fargo, I'm fucking gonna do it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna sit at a diner, I'm gonna have a burger, and then I'm gonna go back. But I'm definitely going.
Love it. So
yeah, I worked with the Pimps of Joy Time for about a year and a half, and it was a really great experience.
Did you like being on the road?
I did.
You like that?
I did.
Okay.
It was exhausting, but it was rewarding. And it was rewarding to be with the band that like played in a bunch of places for the first time, sometimes to an empty house, that like by the second or third time we're selling those places out because they were so good. And, you know, they still tour and do stuff. And the main guy in the band has another project that's brilliant. That's totally different from them. And he's a friend. Like, even though like we wound up parting ways, like he and I have been friends for a very long time since then. And again, I'm grateful for that. So I think like when I lost that client and I had a partner, I was like, I got to bring more stuff in. I got a call from a TV talent person saying like, hey, there's a show that's going to be shooting for a few months this summer. I think you'd be a good talent director for it. It was a DJ competition for BET called Master of the Mix. And I went in and I had to convince them why this, you know, kid from Westchester County should be, you know, booking DJs for a reality competition. But somehow I was able to do that. And they hired me. And like, I wound up living in a house in the Hollywood Hills for like a month and a half with a few of the most legendary DJs out there. Not like EDM guys, like but people like DJ Scratch, who was in
Oh my God,
EPMD,
really?
like DJ Scratch, Victor Duplaix, Rich Medina, who I'd gone to like countless parties of his in New York as a music fan. And I didn't know any of these guys, but I got to know them well. And, Rich became a good friend. Victor became a good friend. But Rich lived in Philly and I lived in New York. So when the show was done, he was in New York once a week. And he's like, Scott, I got a gig. You want to come down? And like I started going and I'd get there early and he and I would have a drink at the bar and just talk about his career and his music, which we'd been doing the whole time on the show, not with me trying to be his manager, just with us becoming friends. And at a certain point, his girlfriend, who was the mother of his son, who had been managing him, called me and said, Scott, would you manage Rich? I just want to be a mom.
wow.
I don't want to do this anymore. And then I started managing Rich, and he and I have been together for 14 years now.
Wow.
And I'm a huge fan of what he does. He's like one of the finest DJs on the planet. And Victor Duplaix is still like a dear friend of mine whose taste I respect and opinion I seek. And like he lives in LA. I don't see him enough, but like I have just the most regard for him. And I don't think I've ever seen a DJ with better prowess on the decks than Scratch. And like his taste is impeccable. Like, so I had just a great experience working with those guys. It was awesome. But like that show brought me to Rich. And because of Rich, it kind of opened up a whole world of people working in that sort of hip hop, soul, funk music scene, not just in New York, but in Philly and LA. And I got to know a lot of folks.
So Scott, how do you build momentum off that in terms of as a music man, as a talent manager in that sense, right? So you're on the road with one band, you then get introduced to this essentially new genre of music, not new genre, but this other genre of music where you continue to then, pick up a client here, pick up a client there. How do you build momentum then when you are building out this stable of artists?
It wasn't really a stable. It was like a couple people at a time. Like I think when I managed the Pimps of Joy time, that was like 90% of my management energy that I could put towards something. So, Rich opened me up to a whole community of people who present and perform and, curate. And that was a huge thing. And also like even the Pimps of Joy time, like we went to Rich's parties, all of us together, different things that he would do. So it all is a little bit, there's a through line. It's soul music for me. It's soulful things for me. So I had other clients too. I don't need to get into it too much, but there was one guy who I worked with for a couple of years named Miguel Atwood Ferguson, who's also just a dear friend who I love. And he's an orchestrator and was renowned for doing this tribute to Jay Dilla after he passed called Suite for Ma Dukes, where they arranged Jay Dilla's music to a massive orchestra. And it's a beautiful album. If you have a minute and want to check it out, it's on all the streaming platforms. And so this band from Australia had just formed and they loved Miguel. And so long story short, a blogger from Paris heard the band and and had the guy who manages them with me, do an interview with them in the backstage room of a little club in Melbourne, called the Evelyn. And they asked, one of the questions was, who do you most want to work with? And they said Miguel Atwood Ferguson. So this blogger hit me up and said, hey, this band loves Miguel. You might really like them. And I was blown away. And then I hit the guy who manages them with me up, whose name is Cy J. Gould. And I was like, hey, I manage Miguel. I'm going to make sure he checks out the band, but I think they're brilliant. Like, if you ever need any help, don't hesitate to reach out. And like within 20 minutes, he hit me back and was like, you want to get on Skype? And we did.
Wow.
And,
wow.
It was very new. The band hadn't even been together 6 months. They had just done their first album very quickly. It wasn't even out. I just chanced upon it. And I chanced upon it and I'm listening to it. And Rich walks into my apartment and he's like, what are you playing? This is great. You got to give this to me. So it's like you hear something, you think it's really good, you trust your instincts, and then someone else hears it and they sort of, verify or, like that.
It's reinforcement.
Yeah, it's reinforcement. And then I'm like, okay, maybe I'm onto something. So in the conversation side's like, look, I think this band could do really well in your part of the world or in Europe or maybe both, but I can't do this alone. Would you, if we get along and hit it off, would you want to manage them with me? And I was like, yeah. And then I just started sharing the music with people at that point.
Amazing.
And it just kind of took off. And it wasn't on me. It was like people like Questlove and Erykah Badu and Prince heard it. Had nothing to do with me, and they're tweeting about it because it was that good. And
this band you're talking about is Hiatus Coyote, right?
Yeah. And so, cool. And I got to know them over Skype at first, and then like 6 months later, I met Napalm, the lead singer, and Cy in person because they came to New York, and then we went to LA, and we did like Nay's first under the radar performances, and they were packed, and we were shocked, just like at the reception for her by herself, not even with the band. It was just really awesome. Not like it hasn't had its challenges, but I've been with Hiatus now for 12 years.
Wow. So what have been some of those challenges?
Oh, I mean, the expense of trying to tour with the band from Australia around the world, where the biggest audience is in the US. Nay had some health things that she had to go through that were really difficult. Just navigating like the stresses of like, trying to turn it into a business that's going to be profitable. This music business, if you're not making pop music, it's really challenging. And then to wind up, to try to build a sustainable career, I think Rich like put it best once when he said like, I'm a working class, world class touring DJ. And I think wow. Like I would yes. I would say that about Hiatus Coyote too. Like right. Nobody's gotten rich off this, but they're making a living doing what they do. They've gotten 3 Grammy nominations, and they're just about to release their 4th album. Like I'm like they signed with a major and didn't get dropped. Like that. Like I mean, I've experienced the worst of it with bands that like you have your dreams on something and then you get dropped. And it's like, how do you pick up the pieces from there? So like for Hiatus, there've been a lot of serendipitous events that have been really amazing, but it's there's plenty of challenges, interpersonal stuff, all sorts of things. There was a point where Cy like needed to step away from management for a couple of years, and I did it on my own. And I spent, almost 6 months of the year for a couple of years in Australia. I mean, it sounds wonderful, but like when you have family and friends home and you want to like have a relationship, it's not easy when you travel that much. And I still travel a lot. I'm about to go on the road with them for like 6 weeks. And I love it. I love them because they're family to me now. But at the same time, it's to balance that with your life can be challenging.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about some of your other clients. Obviously, Hiatus Coyote is a huge one. And you mentioned Rich Medina. Who are some of the other artists that you're currently working with?
I manage a young artist from the UK named Gareth Duncan. I found him on Spotify. Actually, like Victor Duplay sent me a playlist, and one of his songs was on it, and I saved it. But then I was going on a yacht rock sort of dive for new artists, and one of his songs popped up, and I loved it. And then I like checked all his songs out that he had, which weren't many, and then looked at his Instagram and was really impressed. And then I reached out to him, and he had a manager who he still does, who we work together. Really great guy named Jack Neville. And so, Gareth, basically, we just started talking music, and then they asked me to join the management team, which I've been doing, and I helped them get a record deal with an indie label via a secretly group called Drink Some Water. He released his debut album in August, and he's got an EP coming out on the same label in October, and then his next album sometime probably in the first quarter of 2025. He makes kind of sort of combination of like classic soul, new production, beat production, and like a good healthy dose of sort of that soulful yacht rock sound. He's a terrific singer, really talented producer, sweet guy. And yeah, I've been working with him for about 2 years. And then I've been working with another guy named Victor Axelrod for the last probably 5 or 6. He's an old friend of mine. He's a keyboard player who I thought I was going to be a professional musician pretty much at one point. And then I saw him play and I was like, maybe don't quit your day job, Scott.
You realize what,
because he was so good. He was so good and such a nice guy too. And I just was like, we became friends, but like then like 5 years ago, he's like, hey, Scott, could you help me out with stuff? And he's not like, we get together and I'll give him advice and like help him whenever he needs it. But it's not like I'm not on call for Victor. He doesn't need that kind of attention. But when he needs me, I'm there. And I think he's just like, he does these sort of really raw, classic sounding productions. And he is such a tasteful musician and producer and writer. Like any project that he touches is instantly better because he's part of it. And I'm just like glad to be in any way part of what he does because I think he's super talented. But that's it. That's all I got. There's other people I'd like to work with, but I'm only just me. So as long as I work by myself, I think I kind of have to keep it where it is. But if I at some point align myself with a management company, which I may do at some point, maybe I'll have the opportunity to like expand my roster a bit, which I'd like to do.
Well, I don't know where you'd fit anybody else in, but obviously that's where the partnerships are so critically important.
Yeah, totally.
Scott, this journey has just been, that you've taken us through is really remarkable. And towards the end of each show, we do like to talk to our guests about the future of their industry, meaning, if you were to have a conversation with you or a version of you who's 25, 30 years, younger, just getting started, what advice would you have or do you have for somebody who's trying to break into this business?
Know exactly, have a good sense exactly what you want to do within the business. Like have a sense, do you want to be a booking agent? Do you want to work at a record label? Do you want to be a manager? Just have a sense of where you want to specialize and stay focused on that to the best of your ability. You got to believe in yourself. Like, take no for an answer, but don't give up. One no can lead to a yes elsewhere. And I think that's a very important lesson that I've taken with me that like goes way back to before I ever entered the music industry. And I think that's a key sort of North Star for me in the business is just like, if you want something, you got to continue to go for it no matter what. But if you see an opportunity and it seems interesting, like see where that goes. Because in another world, I might have wound up like working in television as a development executive or something. And that would have been cool. And there's part of me that still would love to try to do that at some point. So, it's like if you see an opening, jump into that opening and make yourself indispensable.
Love it.
Like nobody's irreplaceable. Nobody's indispensable, but you can certainly try.
Yeah.
And I know that I have, and I know that like the fact that I have has benefited me more than it's not benefited me.
It's great advice. The one last question that I want to ask you is about the industry at large. You came in the 90s in an incredible period, an incredible era, starting with Steely Dan and Donald Fagen and everyone else. Fast forward to today, like, how do you compare the two universes between yesterday and today? How much have things changed?
Oh,
do they even look the same?
No, they're totally different. I mean, when I came in, the music business was the record labels were making so much money. If you were successful and sold, had a gold record, you saw money most of the time. Like labels, as you change formats, and especially as formats have higher fidelity, everybody's replacing their vinyl with CDs. So people are like buying catalogs again. And who's benefiting? Record labels, primarily. And also, the cost to make a CD was so much less than the cost to press a vinyl, and they're charging more for it. So it was just like, it was highway robbery in a way, and there was a lot of excess. And I think they took their eye off everything. And I could see the writing on the wall when somebody showed me an MP3 CD player And he's like, I have 200 songs on this disc. And I heard it. And I'm like, oh, this sounds good. Why would I?
Yep.
And then like, that was before the iPod. And I was just like, this is going to fuck shit up.
Yeah.
And then obviously LimeWire and Napster, that really disrupted the music business in a bad way. And in a way that really upsets me. And streaming is wonderful for a lover of music. But like the fact that like music is all you can eat, instead of like you save up and buy an album and you got to listen to that album because you only have a certain amount of albums. Now we have everything all the time, and it's an expectation that we're going to have it. And that hurts. That hurts me as a music lover, that like the commodity of the recorded song has lost its value to that extent. Now, if you want to be successful, you have to be really strong on social media and engaged with your fans in that way. You have to like, touring is expensive and hard and difficult to turn a profit doing. It's really challenging, even though it's like to release your music and have it on that platform. It's relatively easy to break through is very challenging. And I think there's still a very valuable role for record labels to play. And in particular, indie labels play a strong role because of the way that the deals are structured, which is different from how major labels structure their deals. It like enables an artist to like have some more equity in their masters, as they're out there. But it's challenging. It's really challenging. And like, I never would have seen it. I wouldn't have seen that like, Tower Records and the Virgin Megastore would cease to exist.
Right.
That like buying new music would become more of a like novelty. And I buy vinyl all the time, but I buy used vinyl.
Yeah.
But that's because I'm a collector and I want the originals. Yeah. But like the artists don't make money off that.
Right.
So yeah, that's the part. It's just like you gotta really want it. If you're gonna do it, you gotta really want it and you gotta be prepared. And then the other thing is like, if you find something and it's your sweet spot that you do well, that resonates with people, don't resist that. I say that to artists and I say it to myself. It's like, even if it's not my favorite thing to do, if I know that I do it well, I'm gonna do it because you want to be successful. And sometimes like leaning into the things that resonate for the people you need to resonate with, you can't avoid that. But I've seen a lot of people say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to do something else. And that's really hard. It's really hard when you're always reinventing yourself to like have a devoted following that sticks with you as an artist. And then in the business, it's just knowing like, I have this skill set. I'm not going to resist using it, even if it's not the thing that I love the most in this.
All right. So before we started this interview, I noticed the amount of books and albums and as you said, CDs on your wall behind you, and it's significant. So big for those of you who can't see it. The man has got a ladder back there to get through all of it. That's how big it is.
I'm very vertically challenged. I'm 5'4", so I better have a ladder
on the top shelf, never touched.
And it looks the kind of ladder that slides back and forth.
It does. How many books? How many albums and CDs are in that collection back there?
Few thousand.
Amazing.
Wow. But if you saw Rich Medina's collection, it puts this to shame.
Wow.
Probably.
Okay.
Rich has 200 shelves, like the full shelf. Like I have 3 of them that you can see.
Wow.
I probably have 4 shelves worth of vinyl in total. He's got like 200.
Amazing.
And you continue to talk about how much you enjoy yacht rock. So
it's just one of many genres of music that I enjoy.
I just want to ask you, is that like at what point? And I'm a lover of yacht rock too. I'm
same,
not gonna say this,
same here.
Right. So how for it seemed like forever the term yacht rock was a derisive term when it came to music. When did it suddenly change?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's somewhat derisive, but at the same time, now I think Michael McDonald said it in an interview. He's like, I'd rather have it be yacht rock than soft rock.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or yacht rock than blue-eyed soul. He didn't like that. He just considers himself a white soul artist, but it's mainly like Caucasian artists making soul music. Primarily, that's what it is. But they did it in such an unironic and sincere, we love this music way, and not trying to like imitate, but just like use those tools to do their thing. And it's a music that I associate with like listening to AM radio as a little kid without knowing what the songs were, but like they stuck with me and I really like them. you know, and it wasn't stuff that my parents listened to. It was just stuff that was playing. And I was like, man, Baby Come Back is a great song.
Yes.
It's a great song. That is a great song.
You know, Kiss on My List by Hall & Oates is a great song. I don't know if it's yacht rock. For me, it's soul rock. It's not even rock. It's basically a version of soul music that white people made that was embraced by a lot of people. And like where it is derisive, it's also something that works on a dance floor, and that's kind of cool.
And I would argue that a lot of people love it.
But my records are mostly like obscure soul, funk, and disco albums from the 70s, because that's what I collect. That's mainly what I'm looking for, is like just like bangers from the 70s that aren't like Freak Out by Chic, but like the more lesser known stuff, you know?
Love it.
Who I think I saw recently open for Duran Duran in Brooklyn, which was really, really
yeah.
fun.
Well, Nile Rodgers produced Duran Duran at one point, you know, some of their bigger stuff.
Scott has forgotten more about music than I'll ever know in my lifetime. Just for those of you out there, it's the truth.
Well,
I think he taught us and our listeners a lot.
This is great, Scott. Thank you so much, man, for your time.
It was really my pleasure. Larry, and Tushar, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with all of you.
Pleasure's all ours.
Thank you for joining us, Scott. This has been fantastic.
You're so welcome. And hopefully I'll see you again soon.
So that was another remarkable conversation, and I think this one was more entertaining than usual for me, because I got a brand new look at the life of Larry Shea. So what a
we got a peek behind the curtain.
Yes, we did.
An incredible journey.
Should I go grab my degree, my music degree? You want me to show you guys that?
Right next to the weather degree you got.
Larry, what are your takeaways from your journey and your mentor?
Yes, Scott Barkham is a special guy. I mean, this one meant a lot to me. You know, I really wanted you to hear in the interview his confidence, right? I mean, he has this quiet confidence about him when he speaks, that he knows what he wants and he goes and gets it, you know? It's infectious about him. I mean, this is the first guy who taught me everything about New York City. Imagine I'm coming from Connecticut and Massachusetts, and I moved to New York City, and I'm like the runner. So I've never been on a subway in my life, you know? So I show up the first day on the job, and Scott was that guy who's like, okay, you're going to go to the front of the train. You're going to go to the southeast exit. You're going to go up the stairs. You're going to, you know, all this stuff, all this New York City knowledge and how to navigate. And when you come up, find the Trade Center, and the Trade Center will let you know which way is south, you know, all the stuff. But he also just taught me to be a professional. I mean, while I was at River Sound, I'm getting to meet Robert Plant and Jimmy Page. I'm getting to meet Slash from Guns N' Roses, Sting. You know, I'm rubbing elbows with all these people, and you're in awe a little bit in the beginning. You know, you don't want to talk to them. You don't want to say too much. And Scott was the guy who kind of broke it down and said, it's okay to be giddy on the inside, but on the outside, they're just people, and make sure that, you know, you're serving them in some capacity because
cool,
you
man.
work here. Yeah, be cool, man. Yes. And so Scott had that quiet confidence that was just infectious. And I really took him as a mentor and really wanted to emulate how he went about his business, because he was just such a pro. And lo and behold, I get promoted to right under him as assistant studio manager. And then 3 months later, the studio closed. But as I said in the interview, you know, it was enough to 3 years. It was enough to parlay that into a studio manager position. I'd learned enough, even though I was only in that role, that particular role as assistant studio manager for 3 months. I mean, that's not a lot of time, but I'd seen Scott do it for 3 years, and I just emulated him. And then you're on your way. So it only takes that one door to crack open, and you kick it open and be ready to kick it open. And Scott was the guy who cracked that door open for me. And I'll never forget it. And I can't thank him enough for it.
You know, the one thing he said was about making yourself indispensable, right? And it reminds me a great deal of a story that I had as a younger man too, where you know, when I was working at WFAN, one of the folks there once said to me, you know, if you really want to prove yourself to an organization, sometimes what you need to do is say, I'll work for free. Work for free till they have to pay you to stay. And that's really the kind of career that Scott's put together. And that, you know, he has made himself to a point where he is known amongst his peers as someone who knows what they're talking about, someone who has obviously got a great deal of taste. and he has come to the point in his career where people kind of have to pay him to stay. He doesn't really need to if he doesn't want to.
Yeah, he gave this one little crucial piece of advice too, and I hope everybody wrote it down, that one no can lead to a yes elsewhere, right? In other words, just because they said no doesn't mean a different door doesn't open, and that's where you were supposed to go anyway. That's the essence of our show, No Wrong Choices. You make a choice, you go with it. Ultimately, you're going to end up where you're supposed to be anyway, right? Whatever choice you make. But I always remembered that from Scott. One no can lead to a yes elsewhere. Believe in yourself, and again, go for the big dream, because you just might get it.
Yeah, and I'll build upon that with a theme that we heard in a previous episode with Scott Farrell, which was be you. In the context of Scott Farrell, he was talking about when the light comes on, be you. But in this case, it's, in your life, in your journey, in your pursuits, in your dreams, identify what fills you up and be you. Scott didn't give in to the pressures from his folks to take the LSATs and everything else. He knew where his heart laid or lied or whatever word I'm looking for, and he stayed true to that. He followed it through, and he's created an incredible life for himself. So, Scott, congratulations on that, and I think all of us have can certainly learn from him in that regard. So with that, Scott, thank you so much for joining this episode of No Wrong Choices. We also thank you for joining us. This episode marks the end, believe it or not, of Season 4. We'll be back right after Labor Day. While we're off recording new shows, we plan to post some best of segments and other highlights that have really stood out to us from the past couple of years. So please keep an eye out for announcements on social media or sign up for our mailing list at NoWrongChoices.com. In terms of platforms, we can be found on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, and X. And you can also listen to our episodes on YouTube. On behalf of Tushar Saxena, Larry Shea, and me, Larry Samuels, thank you again for coming along for the ride. And always remember, there are no wrong choices on the road to success, only opportunities, because we learn from every experience.